The Sports Town Podcast.
Hey guys, thanks for listening. It's a great day. Before we get started with the episode, I'd like to wish everyone a safe, happy 4th of July. Well, in today's podcast, we have a great show for you today. But before, if you're listening on audio platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and so forth, don't forget to rate the podcast. It would help tremendously. And as always, if you're listening to YouTube or watching it, which I'm assuming you are, don't forget to subscribe if you're not subscribed. Don't forget to feel free to comment, like, and hit the bell for notifications so you'll be updated when we release new videos. Today's podcast is a banger. First on the show today, we have first-time guest Jake from the Around the League podcast. You can check out his podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcast, Anchor, and so on and so forth. That was a great episode. We talked about the Suns defeating the Clippers. We talked more about the Eastern Conference Finals. Hopefully the finals aren't done by the time this comes out. But again, that was a great conversation. You can also check him out on social media on Twitter and Instagram at ATL Podcast. And then, of course, we have returning guest Deji Anderson from the Baseball Connection podcast to talk about the baseball season, so forth. The All-Star game is very close, and the selection show, I believe, was on Thursday, so we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the emergence of the Angel Star pitcher. I can't pronounce his name right, so don't get mad at me if I pronounce it wrong. So just to be on the safe side. But again, you can check out his podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcast, there's other things like Audible, stuff like that. So again, don't forget to check his podcast out. And as always, we have the Sports Lightning Round. Questions from Instagram, probably just in the audio version, not on YouTube, unfortunately, because my camera doesn't seem to work at that time. And then we have Highlight of the Week, poll question, and so on and so forth. And that should be it. Also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at SportsTown_podcast or on Twitter at SportsTownPod. All right, let's get the episode started. Alrighty, it's time for our weekly poll question. You can always vote on Instagram and Facebook at SportsDown_podcast or on Twitter at SportsDownPod. Now, this week's questions there's actually two. Should athletes get paid? Excuse me. Excuse my voice here. It's not very good right now. But do you think college athletes should get paid? 67% of you guys said yes. I do agree. I think they should be paid some way or another. To be honest with you, I think college athletes will stay longer. But again, that's a question for another time. And of course, the other question is, should Kawhi Leonard stay with the Clippers or enter free agency? Overwhelmingly, 67% as well of you guys said Kawhi Leonard should enter into free agency. I think he should stay with the Clippers, either opt in or remain, because you saw the Clippers took the Suns all the way to 6 games with just Paul George, and Zubac was out. Of course, Kawhi was out. Serge Ibaka was out. But again, thanks for doing the questions. Again, you can vote every week on Instagram and Facebook at SportsTown_podcast or on Twitter at SportsTownPod.
This is the highlight of the week.
Shea Weber for Deneau. Woodrow, maybe one last chance. Centers, scores! They beat the buzzer! And it's Blake Coleman. A back-breaking goal here for the Lightning with 0.3 seconds on the clock.
What a goal by Blake Coleman to put Tampa Bay up 2-1 in Game 2, assisted by Barclay Goodrow and Ryan McDonough. I hope I pronounced those names right. The Lightning would end up winning Game 2 3-1 and now have a 2-0 series lead at the time of this recording. Veteran broadcasters Kenny Albert and Brian Boucher from NBC were on the call. And now, on to our interview with Around the League podcast. All right, I'm pleased to be joined by Jake from Around the League podcast. How's it going, Jake?
Doing good, man. How about yourself?
I am doing great. Of course, there's something big that happened on Wednesday night. Now, the time of this recording was on Thursday. We'll talk about the Suns defeating the Clippers in 6 games. But first, can you tell us more about your podcast, how it works, when it's released, all that good stuff?
Yeah, man. So I started with my co-host, who's actually a childhood friend of mine, back in November of 2019, and he actually started it with one of my other friends in the summer of that year. But then they kind of just did one episode. You kind of know how it goes, where this podcast go one or two episodes, whatever, and then you kind of forget about it. But then we brought it on before quarantine. It wasn't the quarantine podcast, but quarantine's kind of where we made our first strides, got on our big guest, and we kind of just started rolling with it. So I'm just a big basketball fan, as he is. And so, we just talk about hoops. That's what we like to do. And I've been really invested in these playoffs, man. Let me tell you that.
Well, they've definitely been crazy, especially with the Suns getting to the finals, all the injuries that happened. Let's talk about the Suns and Clippers. Of course, the Suns beat the Clippers in 6 games. Chris Paul is finally in the finals. What do you say of the Suns? Do you think the Suns can win it, or do you think there's a better chance that the Bucks, if they have Giannis, they can take it all?
Yeah, well, that's the big question, right? It's whoever comes out of the East, are they going to be fully healthy with their number one option? So as far as the Suns go, I mean, it could just be the healthiest team in all of basketball right now. And there's only 3 teams left, but that's saying a lot when you look at the other side right now. So I really do think that the Suns, I think whoever they play, the Bucks might be a better option or a better team on paper. But I do think that like the inconsistencies of what we've seen from the Bucks, I think Giannis, especially him being out right now, has been their most consistent player. And then besides that, it's up for debate who's that like second, third most consistent player. So they definitely need him. But if he's in, it's going to be interesting. I think that Brook Lopez is going to be an interesting factor because we've seen him against like guys like Bruce Brown, where he was just giving up straight floaters to him in one game. Then you had Trae Young, who he was going off in game 1 against Brook Lopez as well. So we'll have to see how that goes with like Chris Paul and Devin Booker, because they can go get their shot in the mid-range area, as we all know. So I think that's going to be an interesting matchup. But yeah, I think that like the inconsistencies, I mean, it starts from the top with Coach Budenholzer. We don't know what we're getting out of him from game to game, as we know what we're getting from Monty Williams from a game-to-game adjustments. So I do think that the Suns are the most consistent team left and the healthiest team left. So I would say I've been wrong with a lot of predictions this postseason. I actually thought that the Suns would lose in the first round against the Lakers, but then it spiraled out of control where like AD with the groin, and then LeBron wasn't 100% either from you could even see that in the play-in. So yeah, I do think that like I've been wrong about a lot of things, but I would say the Suns. I would put some money on that.
I originally thought the Lakers would somehow pull it or would end up beating the Suns in the first round just because it's the Lakers, just because it's LeBron. But yeah, I think with AD's injuries and of course LeBron not being 100%, and then of course you look at how well the Suns play, especially in game 4, 5, and 6. But yeah, the Suns have had a great run. I definitely agree with you as well about whoever the most healthiest team. And it seems like the Suns are getting super healthy now with Chris Paul being back. Devin Booker seems like he's fine. But my question about the Clippers is if they would have had Kawhi Leonard, and if they would have had Zubac, and if they would have had all their roster at 100%, I think they would have beaten the Suns. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to think about hypotheticals, right? But if you insert Kawhi Leonard, who's been there before, if you insert Zubac, who I thought had a pretty good series and really challenged Ayton in a lot of different aspects, and pick and roll coverage and the rebounding aspect and whatnot. I really think he had a good series. And even, I don't know if you mentioned Ibaka. I mean, that's a guy that they picked up over the summer, and he wasn't healthy throughout the entirety of these playoffs, as we know. So I think with definitely all 3 of those guys back, like they definitely would have contested them even more. I mean, the Clippers were a team that showed a lot of heart in these playoffs for guys from Reggie Jackson, who was bought out from the Pistons and was sort of just like on his last leg with the Clippers in terms of his NBA career. And then you have like DeMarcus Cousins, who was just picked up, this past, what was it, like February, whatever it was. And then you have a guy like Terrence Mann, who I'm a big fan of because I go to the same school that he came out of. So, he's put up some great minutes. So, I mean, just seeing like their overall roster construction and how they've been able to just steal game after game. I mean, no one thought they were going to even beat the number 1 seed in the Jazz. So, just seeing how they've really just battled. I think if they had Kawhi Leonard, I mean, because their offense is just kind of like at times, like it's not really anything special. And if you don't have Paul George going off like he did in Game 5 where he scored 41 on great efficiency, if you don't have that guy rolling, then there's going to be troubles for sure.
Yeah, because I think when Kawhi went out, they said, "Oh, there's the Clippers' chance of winning it all," and then they end up taking 2 games from Utah. They end up somehow winning 2 games against Phoenix, and I always, for some reason, forget about Serge Ibaka, to be honest with you. But yeah, if they would have had Serge Ibaka, Kawhi Leonard, Zubac, I think they would have probably ended up winning. But again, you really never know with how well the Suns played this year. How well do you think the Suns will? We've kind of already mentioned this, but Phoenix is finally in now. Do you think that will make, let me rephrase that. With Chris Paul finally making his first NBA Finals, does that finally put him in the possible top 5 in point guards of all time? Or what do you think about Chris Paul's status of being somewhere in the elite, like being super elite now that he's finally made an NBA Finals?
Yeah, I think definitely like I would say top 5. Yeah, I would say that just because like. And it really put into perspective. Yesterday, I was listening to the after the game where they were starting to do the trophy presentation, whatever. Mark Jackson kind of put it in perspective. He's like this is kind of just a win in terms of his like point guard conversation, Hall of Fame conversation. We already know he's a Hall of Fame point guard, but in terms of just like taking a team to the finals, that's a win because this guy was, and in my opinion, outside of LeBron, I think he's the most impactful player in the NBA. Like a guy that you could just put on any single NBA team, he can just transform that team. Because taking a team to the finals without even winning the ring, like let's discard that just for now, is a huge accomplishment. I mean, this is a team that was out of the playoffs for the last decade, and it just and it wasn't only him; it was Jay Crowder who had a big game last night in Game 6, and obviously had a historic run with the Heat last season. And he's back-to-back finals now. So just to see like Chris Paul come in and see like the effect that he's had on this whole entire roster. I mean, I didn't really know like Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton. I knew they were good. I didn't know they were this good where they would come out and show like they really didn't have any because that was like my whole thing in the first round was like I just feel like they're 1 year away. I feel like they're too inexperienced just because of the roster around Chris Paul. And I think that was kind of where a lot of people had their reservations was that, look, I think these guys can be a middle of the pack team. I'm not sure if they can be a top seed. And they proved us wrong there. They also proved us wrong where I thought they were going to get knocked out by the reigning NBA champions. So, I mean, Chris Paul just taking this team to the finals is an accomplishment in itself. And I think it deserves more notoriety than what people think it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, like what Chris Paul did last year with the Thunder, when he was traded to OKC, they thought, oh, the Thunder are going to be trash now, and they're probably going to be trading Chris Paul sometime in the middle of the season. All of a sudden, he leads the, Thunder to the playoffs, which was amazing. But yeah, I would definitely think Chris Paul is somewhere in the top 5 or top 10 among the best point guards of all time. What did you think about Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton's performance? Because they really stepped up this year, especially, I think, of course, adding Chris Paul helped them a lot. But what did you think about their performance this whole postseason?
Yeah, I think I want to say, well, we saw with DeAndre Ayton in this past series where, like, I think when he's on, like, they're on type of thing. Because, like, when you're able to feed a guy like that where he has so much more talent than I thought he did. And honestly, like, he could be a guy that he's not really like a post threat where you could just throw him in and he could just, like, body someone. But, I mean, the hook shot's there, a guy that can – I mean, he has a mid-range jumper that's there and he can hit it. But I think, like, even more impressive with DeAndre Ayton now that I'm thinking about it is the fact that – like we saw Nurkic on Jokic and just like how much foul trouble he was in. Like when he was playing Jokic, like the MVP of this year, like he really did not give up much to the MVP. I mean, again, the guy's going to put up what he puts up. But at the same time, if you're able to do it without fouling, that's even more impressive. And I think like throughout that whole entire series, I don't have the numbers pulled up, but the guy literally did not foul that much. And I think like, Nurkic like fouled out in like game 2, game 3, like 3 games out of that series, he fouled out 3 or 4 games. And I think it's just a testament to what DeAndre Ayton, the work that he's put in, the team that he's on with Monty Williams. And a lot of this is due to Monty Williams. I think like the player relationships that he has with a lot of these guys, and then just putting them in the right spots and drawing up plays and whatnot. Like, for example, that one of the first games where they drew up that play and threw it up to Ayton for the win. I mean, that's a great play drawn up by Monty Williams and a great pass from Jay Crowder. And so I've just been blown away by DeAndre. And as far as Devin Booker goes, I just think the guy is, I do agree with a lot of people, like the next coming of like Kobe Bryant. Like I do see a lot of similarities in that game. And again, the guy can get his shot in a multitude of ways. I mean, when he's going around in pick and roll, I mean, he looks Chris Paul-esque, like he looks like his teammate. And so I do think that like what we've seen from both of these guys has been, monumental in these playoffs. And a lot of it, again, is luck in terms of like the road that they were able to get to the finals. It is luck. But you have to respect like just the talent level that they have for such a young team.
Yeah, and it's like I said, DeAndre in the first few years of his career, where everybody was kind of comparing him to, of course, Luka Doncic, Trae Young. But I think this year he's really proven. I mean, he's not better than Luka Doncic or Trae Young, but he's finally proved that he was a good pick. And I was always pretty high on DeAndre Ayton to start with, but I think the Suns finally got what they wanted out of Ayton, and I think this is going to be a great duo for the next few years to come. So. Right now, it looks like Giannis could be out at least for Game 5. I'm not sure what his other status is, but who do you like in the Eastern Conference right now? And do you think there's and then whoever comes out of the Eastern Conference, who do you think wins it all?
Yeah, I'll just say this first. I don't really want the Bucks to win necessarily because I'm still salty about what they did to my Miami Heat, but it's okay. Bryn Forbes isn't lighting it up, so all right. But at the same time, it's tough to kind of predict the outcome of that series just because we've seen Trae Young, without like him, they did fine, but it was only a game. So it's a small sample size as well as like Giannis, it's only been half a game. And so we look at both those teams without their respective players. And I have more confidence actually in the Hawks just because like, based off of what I've seen. Like I haven't seen like the Milwaukee offense. I've even seen the Milwaukee offense though with Giannis, and it's not like a lot of it's Bud because it's just not a lot of movement or whatever. Like that's kind of what they fell into with the Nets series. But as far as like they lose a lot with Giannis. Like let's just be honest, the most consistent scorer, I've talked about it before. A guy that can screen for like your ball handler, whether that be Holiday or Middleton, and that's deadly because you have to like cover Giannis rolling into the rim, but you also have to cover like a guy like Drew Holiday or Middleton that can go get their own shot off that pick and roll. So it's like really hard to defend. But when he wasn't out there, like you saw in just that small sample size of half a game in which like there wasn't like any movement whatsoever. They were just kind of like, it was just kind of like bailout basketball where it was like, okay, Middleton's not, and that's the thing with Middleton too. I don't mean to criticize him, but like it's just like you see time and time again, like he'll come out and have like a poor second half like he did last game, but then in Game 4 he's coming out or Game 3 coming out in the second half, and there's no one that could stop him in that second half. I mean, he put up like 20 in the second half. So there's kind of like that hero ball with Middleton where it's like, okay, just go get me like some buckets, and he'll give it to you consistently in one game and then inconsistently in the other game. And so it's a question about like who's that second guy, and like you could go as far as to say like it's Bobby Portis because every time he comes in, it's straight energy. You know what you're going to get from him, And I think like off the bench, he's been one of the most productive players. You could say like Connaughton more or less, I guess, but I think it's probably been Portis like their best, and he was one of their best 3-point shooters throughout the whole entire season. So you really don't know outside of Giannis what you're going to get, and that's the thing that scares me with the Bucks. As far as the Hawks go, we've seen how they can operate without Trae Young. I mean, Lou Williams, to a lesser extent, obviously, came in and gave them, I'm not going to say like Trae Young type minutes, but I mean, similar to that in the fact that he was getting pick and rolls, whatever, he was getting to his spots. Lou Williams can, ISO a guy. We all know that. But I think like down the stretch, I'm not sure if I can, it's tough to predict that series. I would say like on paper, it's easy to say Bucks in like 7. And that's what I was kind of going towards. But I still have to see more. But I would say that right now. I just don't really have too much faith in like the Bucks offense, but I can see like 1 or 2 games where Chris Middleton is playing that type of basketball down the stretch. And I think that's what they need to fuel some victories.
I've heard this a lot of people have said, and I think he's a number 1. But do you think Giannis is a number 1, or is he more like a number 2? And to be honest with you, I think he's a top 5 player in the league, and I think he's a number 1. But I've heard so many people have said he's not a number 1, he's a number 2. What do you think about Giannis? And if he's not a number 1, is Middleton that guy, or just who do you think the number 1 guy for the Bucks is?
Yeah, well, I would ask people like, do people think Middleton's number 2? Because then or do they think Middleton's the number 1? Because if not, like who else is? I think Giannis is, because we've seen like him be the anchor of a defense. He's a great help defender. He's reigning defensive player of the year. And he's a guy that you can throw in there and he can guard pretty much, anyone. You throw him out there and he can guard pretty much anyone. So you have a guy that can set screens, a guy that can roll to the rim, a guy that can, when he wants to, take down anyone in the paint. And again, the thing that's lacking, and I think this is what people are probably like taking the notch down on him in terms of like where he ranks on that team, which I think he's a 1. But as far as like his shooting, I think like his 3-point shooting, once again, there's times where, and I actually think I'm one of the people that thinks that him taking 1 3 a game isn't bad. Like if you're open, shoot it. Like I don't see what's wrong with that. If you shoot 8 of them, then that's a different story. And you're not hitting any of them, obviously, don't take them. But I'm not opposed to the guy taking 1 3. I think people overreact whenever they see Giannis taking like 1 3. And the free throw shooting, yeah, it's got to improve. But look, and this is how I look at it. At least he's taking the drives to the rim, and he's been increasingly better throughout these playoffs in doing that and being more aggressive and playing his style of basketball. And that has a lot to do with like the Bucks defense as well, getting out in transition. That just fuels Giannis's game. But the way I look at the free throw shooting is I compare it to like Ben Simmons. Like Ben Simmons won't even go to the line. At least Giannis tries to go to the line, on top of the fact that they're doing the 10-second countdown, or the count up, I guess. And the fact that like that's got to be like a lot of pressure on you. At least he's like taking it to the hole. At least he's showing like he's a confident guy in doing that. And I think that like that shows a lot from a player, because you have Ben Simmons, which they're not even trying to count up. They don't do that. And Philly's encouraging him to go to the line, because that's not where he thrives, but it's a place where you can get an easy 2 points. So yeah, I think the honest criticism just comes down to the shooting, and that's pretty much it. I think everything else he does impacts a team, and it impacts it at a high level. So,
to be honest with you, I think Giannis is a top 3 player. I'm like you. I think his shooting is really the only weakness in his game. Now, of course, his free throws isn't good either, but I just think it's just shooting is just not his strength. But to be honest with you, I think he's a number 1 all the way until the 4th quarter with a few minutes left. Then you need to give the ball up to Chris Middleton and let him make a few shots, because the Bucks, I think, are better when that happens. But We'll see what ends up happening. There's another guy that's been super impressive this postseason. That's Kevin Huerter. And I believe I don't know if he's a free agent or not, but supposedly if he is, he's going to get a massive contract in the offseason. What do you think about Kevin Huerter's future, and how impressed with Kevin Huerter have you been?
Yeah, I've been actually super impressed with Kevin Huerter. I've tweeted about this before. He's actually been one of my favorite players to watch because he does things on both sides of the ball that you want out of a guy that you have on your team. He's a great two-way guard. I think, like, defensively, he keeps his ground and stays put and does the things that you want to win basketball games. And then as far as, like, offensively, he can be sort of a guy that can give you, we saw in the Philadelphia series where he, in that closeout game, he had like 25 points, something like that. And so he can be a guy that you can go to in moments like that. And I think, like, pairing him along with Trey is a great thing. I think both of them, I think the guard play, and I think this can lead to that kind of conversation where, like, they have great guards. I think, like, what we've really underestimated is this Atlanta Hawks team with just how far they've come. And that's because of, like, a guy like Lou Williams, where they don't really skip a beat too much because you have a guy in which he's been in these moments in the playoffs. Then you have Bogdanovich, who, again, dealing with injuries is one thing. And again, the guy, he's had a great postseason, up and down, but it's because of the injury. Like, if he wasn't injured, I think he's definitely a contributor there. Trae Young, it goes without saying what he does. And I think, like, it was surprising to see the Hawks pull that out. I think that's probably because the Bucks are just being the Bucks, and I know I'm getting on the Bucks a lot, but they're a talented team, so there's nothing to really take away from them. But I did lay out my criticism with them. But then Kevin Huerter, like you said, he's been great, and I think, like, both sides of the ball. He played great defense the other night, and so did, like, Bogdanovich, Cam Reddish. All those guys were coming in, and some of those guys haven't even played for months. So for them to go in and get rotational minutes, they surely proved that they were worthy of them.
Yeah, again, I've been super impressed with Kevin Huerter as well. And to be honest with you, not a lot of people gave the Hawks much of a chance this series, and they have done an excellent job. I mean, even this playoffs, no one has really given them much. I think they were expected to lose the Knicks in the first round, and that obviously didn't happen. So again, kudos to the Hawks, and like the Suns, they're probably going to be here for the next few years if they can keep that core intact. And of course, Trae Young will just get better and better once, of course, he gets healthy and stuff. And again, thanks for coming on. As we wrap up the interview, let's talk more about what's going to happen this offseason. Now, you mentioned you're a Miami Heat fan, and it feels like, and I've heard this from a lot of people, and I think it was mostly from Chris Broussard from Fox Sports. He mentioned that the Miami Heat need another star to pair with Jimmy Butler. Who do you think they could get? And I guess they could get Kawhi Leonard. There's been a lot of rumors about him going to Miami. I personally think he's going to stay with the Clippers. But what do you think the Heat need to do this offseason in order to get back to what they were in the bubble?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of rumors, and this is what Heat fans like to get into, Knicks fans even like to get into. It happens more often than what the Knicks have done, just because we fell out in 2017 to, like, Gordon Hayward, KD. So we've had our fair share again with Jimmy coming. What was it, 2 summers ago? That's been something that's kept our hopes high in terms of, like, getting another free agent. I don't know. I wouldn't really. I've been telling people, like, I'm not really getting my hopes up because I think, like, there's a better opportunity in the trade market in terms of, like, who we can get there. Because as far as our cap situation goes, it's just kind of like we can get rid of Goran Dragic and Andre Iguodala are only team options, so we can release them if we're trying to, like, make some space. But I don't see, like, Kawhi Leonard leaving LA, as you said. I don't see him leaving there, especially with seeing what they could have done with him. I just feel as if, and also the management's going to really persuade him to stay because they spent so much capital in terms of like the draft and players to get him and Paul George in LA, where it's like if they lose him, it's not really a good sight in terms of like, you know, the assets that they'll have moving forward, because they'll lose him for nothing. So I really don't think like people have been saying like we need a stretch four, and I wholeheartely agree with that, because we need a guy that can space the floor, unless Bam can develop a reliable jump shot, which we've seen like him increase his mid-range jumper and really use that efficiently this season, or at least more efficiently. And so he's really developed his game. I hope that Team USA like really brings him in terms of his development and rises that. But someone that can, unless he develops his own jump shot, we need someone that can space the floor. That's someone that like Jay Crowder that really like spaced the floor for us, was a guy that allowed us to play sort of small ball on defense last season, and really allowed us to break through in the NBA playoffs in the bubble last season. So we need someone like that again, because Trevor Ariza, he's aging and he's a veteran, in which he was providing us good minutes when like we first got him, but then kind of like tailored off. Dedmon's been great, but again, not a shooter. And these are guys in which they're great for the team, but we need someone that can be a reliable stretch four. So in terms of your question, I would say like, again, I wouldn't really trust the free agent market that much. I have seen Colin Sexton, just because he's been rumored to leave the Cavs, in terms of like just his relationship with the organization. People on the team reportedly called him a ball hog and all that stuff. So I think he would fit the Heat culture pretty well, and I see a lot of fans getting excited about that. And there's a package in which it sends him and Kevin Love. So that's something you could look into, just because I believe Kevin Love is on it expiring. I could be wrong about that, but I believe he is. So you give that a test run, see how that goes. And he's that guy you could plug in there. Although he is another veteran, it is the guy in which can help you win. And if it doesn't work, then so what? You gave it a shot 1 year. And then Colin Sexton is a guy that you bring in defensively, or not defensively so much, but definitely offensively. I think him is a sort of like a microwave scorer. That's a guy that can come in and really give you a lot of production there. And again, we just need guys that can score, because our offense was not that great. Defensively, I think we're fine, but definitely offensively, I think we need some improvement, especially in our backcourt with, I think, just inconsistency all season with like Tyler. We thought we were going to get more. With Goran, we thought we were going to get more. And just to kind of just, Kendrick Nunn, when he was put in there, like had a big stretch, like 20, 25 games where he was really going off when we had our COVID stuff, injury stuff. And so, yeah, I know I'm rambling, but just as far as like Colin Sexton, Kevin Love, I think that could be something you look into. Dame, I think, is more unrealistic, just because of the packages I think teams will give for him. But again, I think that I would love Dame in Miami. I just don't know if like we'll have the necessary package that I think other teams will give for Dame. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with a lot of those. Kyle Lowry, in my opinion, is another guy that you could go after. I feel like he'd be pretty cheap because it feels like he's out of Toronto, and I'm not sure if he's a free agent, but either way, I think he's going to end up leaving Toronto because I think the Raptors, that core probably needs to be just exploded and restart over them, and they got their championship. So it'll be a definitely interesting offseason. I've said this a lot as well, too. It seems like the free agent class isn't very deep. So you're going to see a lot of trades happening and just a lot of different, moving parts in the NBA, just like every year. But just with this year, the free agency class not being as deep and as good. But yeah, so as we end the interview, again, thanks for coming on, Jake. Is there anything you have store for your podcast, and where can we find it? I'm assuming we can find it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And then where can we also follow you on social media?
Yeah, so I just want to say, first off, thanks for having me on. Definitely had a good time with the interview. So I appreciate the invite. have me on this thing. So as far as our podcast, you guys can find us on, we're on Apple Pod, Spotify, Anchor app, Around the League. And then as far as our Instagram social medias go, Instagram @ Around the League _, Twitter @ ATL podcast _. I'll just say those because those are really the two most, I would say like the two most like popular in terms of like the activity level on those. So that's the ones where we're the most active. And then as far as we are trying to start a YouTube channel, that's something that's in the works. So be on the lookout for that. But yeah, that's pretty much it, man.
All right. Thanks for coming on. Again, don't forget to check him out. His podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Around the League. You can also follow him on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for coming on, Jake, and have a wonderful day and enjoy the playoffs.
Yes, sir. You too, man.
And now on to our interview with the Baseball Connection podcast. All right. I'm pleased to be joined by a reoccurring guest, Deji Andrews. How's it going, Deji?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Now, Deji is the host of the Baseball Connection podcast. He's been on here once. I think it was like in April last time he came on. So before we talk about the season so far, and it's been an interesting season so far to say the least, but if you can tell us more about your podcast, what you have in store for the future, just stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I host the Baseball Connection podcast. It's a daily baseball podcast where just talk about mostly Major League Baseball. I'll sneak in some other stuff here and there, but mostly Major League Baseball every day. It's usually going to be a recap of what we just saw or hot button topics around the league. And occasionally, it's been a while, but occasionally I'll even have guests on there and we'll just talk some baseball. So that's all it is.
Okay. Thanks for coming on again. Now we'll start with the season. The season has been very interesting, to say the least. But the team that I'm kind of shocked about, they actually have the best record, they have the best record out of the Giants. We were talking a little bit about before we started recording. You thought the Giants, you were kind of shocked about how good San Francisco was this year. Why do you think they're so good this year? And is there a chance that they could, how big of a chance do you think they'll make the World Series this year?
Yeah, so the Giants have surprised a lot of people, and myself included. I think the reason why they're good is because they've had a renaissance year from a lot of their key guys. Those traditional names you've always heard, the Brandon Belts, the Buster Posies of the world, Brandon Crawford, Killer Bees in a sense. Those guys have really had a resurgent year. I mean, Buster Posey is going to start at catcher in the All-Star game, and just a year or two ago, people thought he was done. He was washed up. I think what really helped him, honestly, was taking the year off for the pandemic and just really getting healthy, because he had all these, I believe he had some hip injuries, some lower body injuries that had really been nagging him. And he opted out of last season. I think that was a blessing in disguise, because now he's back and you can really see him being able to turn on that inside fastball again. He could hit for power. And that's the Buster Posey who we've seen behind the dish for a decade plus in San Francisco. Brandon Crawford, he's in his mid-30s and he's having perhaps the best year of his career, especially with the power numbers. Belt has been injured for a little bit, but while he's been on the field, he's been really good. So I think that's the main reason that they've been very good. And of course, on the pitching side of things, Kevin Gausman has been one of the best pitchers in all of baseball this year. And I did not see that coming at all. He was good last year, but he took another step this year and he's on a one-year deal. He's going to get a pretty nice free agent contract in the winter.
Another team that I'm kind of surprised being so good, and I guess, I don't know, I didn't really think they'd be this good. The Red Sox, they have currently the second best record. I believe they have the second best record in baseball, and they have the best in the American League. Are you shocked by them being so good?
I'm shocked. I would say this is, it's just as shocking as San Francisco, honestly, because this was a Red Sox team that, last year, the worst or the second worst. They weren't as bad as, the Pirates, for instance, but they were, one of the worst teams in the league last year, even in a shortened season. And last year they would have guys out there who even Red Sox fans didn't even know their names, like pitching that day, like random guys from the alternate side. But this year, I think the reason they're doing better is the same thing that we're seeing in San Francisco. It's a return to form for the guys who have been there already. It's JD Martinez returning to form. It's Rafael Devers returning to form. Those are the main pieces. And then the pitching, I do think that the Red Sox pitching has overachieved a bit. to an extent this year. And we've seen a little bit of regression over the past few weeks or a month. But guys like Nathan Eovaldi have really stepped up. Guys like Nick Pivetta have been a surprise. And then Chris Sale's actually expected to be back sometime next month. So that's going to be very interesting. A lot of people in Boston have been waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it just hasn't happened. They've just ripped off more wins. And I do think the Red Sox are going to be in the playoffs this year. If not winning the AL East, definitely going to have a wild card. But yeah, it's going to be a fun year in Boston.
Yeah, I mean, Boston's one of those teams. They're really interesting because one year they'll be really good, and the next year they won't be good at all. Because I remember when they won the World Series in 2013, the next year they were not good. And it just kind of, they do that a lot. It seems
they do that a lot. They go from first to worst back to. You're very right. Like 2013 World Series and the next 14, I think they were in last place. It is just like this yo-yo effect. It's kind of funny, but I will say, like, for as much criticism as John Henry, the owner of the Red Sox, gets because he's made some questionable moves and things like that, the dude knows how to win, right? So, like, if you're in Boston, I think, like, okay, this dude has won 4 championships in 16 years, 17 years. I think you can give him the benefit of the doubt. Yes, Boston fans have high expectations, and those years that they're not doing well, they have really short fuse and they want to see success. But if you give John Henry and the ownership team a little bit of time, they're willing to spend the money and go out and get guys. So them having a down year last year doesn't necessarily mean they're in this rebuilding phase as we see right now. They're doing really well.
And I don't know, maybe it's just because it was only a 60-game season, but do you think a lot of teams similar to the Red Sox didn't really try as hard just because it was a very shortened season last year?
I do. I do think so. I think Boston knew the season was a lost cause. As soon as, in spring training, Chris Sale went down with Tommy John. And then, it was a 60-game season. They saw their roster. They didn't really have much to work with, and they struggled out of the gate last year. They obviously were going to make moves at the deadline, and they're like, okay, whatever, we'll ride it out. Because, I mean, now, if you look at it, the Red Sox have the number 4 pick in the draft, which really shouldn't be happening. A team that good shouldn't be picking that high, but I guess that's what happens in a weird year like 2020.
Let's go to the All-Star selection. I guess it was on Thursday night. Now, at the time of this recording, it was Friday. What did you think about the selections, and do you think there was someone that got screwed over?
I think this year's selections were pretty fair. I mean, there's some guys I was happy to see there, like Marcus Semien, for example, with the Blue Jays. This is like, I like it when guys on 1-year deals go out and prove it. And, they can go out and get a nice contract afterwards. But I think it was really fair. There weren't really any surprises here. I mean, of course, Mike Trout's in there. And some people are saying, oh, don't vote for Mike Trout because he's hurt. I guess that's a fair statement because there is someone who's healthy that definitely could be that could be there instead. But the way I see it is, at the end of the day, when Mike Trout retires, right, he's going to have his resume, and like everyone has their resume. All-star selections, that's a line item on that resume, and it's going to count at the end of the day. I mean, they're going to get someone in there as an injury replacement anyway, but the fact that he was named as a starter, I think that's good in the long run because, like, Mike Trout just deserves all the accolades he can get. Because if he was healthy, he'd probably be the MVP because he was off to the best start of his career. So all-star selections, I have absolutely no issues with this year. I think it was really fair.
Yeah, you just recently mentioned Mike Trout, and I feel like, yeah, he's hurt, but he is the best player in baseball. And before his injury, he was having another MVP type of season. And I feel like Mike Trout is kind of like the Michael Jordan of baseball, basically. And I think Jordan one year was hurt in his second or third year, and he still made the All-Star game despite missing so many games. So I don't really have a problem with Mike Trout making the All-Star game either. But we know at the end of the day that once he retires, as you mentioned, he's probably going to be top 3 or top 5. Now, he needs to win a ring, I think, but that's another story. But I still think I have really no problem with him making the All-Star game. Let's go on to, what player have you been kind of disappointed that you thought would have a really good year, but just hasn't had the type of season that we were expecting him to have?
That's a good question. What player? I mean, there have been a lot of the opposite, but player that's kind of underperformed expectations to this point. I have to think about that for a moment. I mean, this one, yeah. Okay, so the one that comes to my mind right now, and it's kind of unfair, but it's Juan Soto. So we know he's a stud. But it's not that he's having a bad season. He's having a great season. But we've just been so spoiled, number one, by him, by what he's done in the past couple of years, and number two, by the like crazy numbers we're seeing from the Vlads and the Otanis and the Tatis and Acuñas of the world. But Juan Soto is somebody who we know is an elite hitter, arguably actually the best hitter in the game when he's on, because of his on-base skills, his eye at the plate and things like that. But this year, you're not hearing too much Juan Soto, even though he has an OPS. I'm pretty sure it's north of 850 or something like that. So I would say that's someone, but I mean, the bar is just really high for him. And remember, he's super young. I would say, obviously be patient with him. This time last year, we were saying the same thing about Vlad Jr. Like, we haven't seen anything from Vlad. This dude is overrated. And now you have to remember, these kids are 21, 22 years old, and it takes time. It takes time.
Let's go. I'm actually a Cardinals fan, and we've kind of hit kind of a wall basically where we're really struggling. I know the pitching staff hasn't been great. We've had a lot of injuries, especially on the pitching side. Do you think there's a chance that the Cardinals can, after the All-Star break, can finally get back to what they were in the very beginning of the season?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. Honestly, it's going to be tough because the Cubs are a lot better than people anticipated. I would say the Cubs are doing what people thought the Cardinals would be doing, and vice versa. When the Cubs went out and they sold everyone, I'm like, okay, it's going to be rebuilding year on the north side of Chicago. And then now all of a sudden they're doing well. Cardinals have kind of stumbled, kind of faltered. Surprisingly, you guys are getting great production out of your veterans, Molina and Wainwright. But, I think the issue with the Cardinals right now is, some of those young, especially the young outfielders, the Dylan Carlsons, there's somebody else in the outfield I'm forgetting. But those guys have been having to get a lot of ABs. Carlson's usually leading off or batting second for them. And that's a lot for a young kid like him, So yes, you have your veteran presence, like your Goldschmidts and your Arenado at the corners, but I do want to see a little bit more from Goldschmidt. I do want to see a little bit more from that. Obviously losing Colton Wong at second base defensively, that's going to hurt as well. So it's a mix of things with the Cardinals. And then obviously the pitching staff it's been meh, like here and there. So it's a mix of things for the Cardinals, and obviously the Cubs having such a strong season. And, the NL Central always has a couple good teams in there. So, yeah, I think they can do it, the Cardinals, but they'll have to be very urgent and they'll need some help, honestly.
Yeah, the NL Central has been really good this year. I mean, the Cubs, of course, and the Brewers have been solid. The Reds have been pretty good. And then, of course, the Cardinals, Goldschmidt isn't doing the same thing he was expected to do. Arenado's doing pretty solid, but I feel like he can do a little more. Tyler O'Neill has been the one who's been really impressive. Right. But yeah, of course, Flaherty was having a great season, and then he got hurt, and it's just we haven't been able to find that replacement. So yeah, let's just stay in the NL Central. The Reds, I know they were expected to do a little more this year. I'm a little shocked. I didn't think the Reds would be that good. What do you think about the Reds so far this season? And is there a chance they could win the NL Central?
Yeah, so I think the Reds are a fun team. I didn't really see them. Not many people, maybe unless you're a Reds fan and knew this, I didn't see them having the kind of offense they're having right now. They have the best 1-2 punch in all of baseball. Castellanos, Winker right there, 1 and 2. They're like near the top in the league in OPS. It's good. It's going to be good to see 2 Reds starting in the outfield in the All-Star game. But a guy like Winker, for instance, coming into the season, people thought he was a fourth outfielder. A guy who never really got too much playing time. He always showed those skills, especially the on-base skills and a little bit of pop. But this year, he kind of stole that job. Shogo Akiyama isn't playing all that. So you're like, okay, Winker's your guy, and he's taken off. Castellanos, we've always known he could hit. We saw what he did with the Cubs, a couple of years ago. And, he was, when he was traded for, and he was really good over there. So I was not surprised with the Castellanos at all. It's the Winker rounding into form. Of course, you have, Joey Votto, the old vet, doing his thing. He's not the same Joey Votto, but once in a while he'll give us flashes here and there. And we've actually we've had injuries from Mike Mustaka, so they're not even at full strength. So when they get him back, they'll be really good to go. So yeah, I think the Reds are a fun team, but they're not a contender. There's a difference between being a fun team and a contender. They're not there yet as far as contention, but they're a fun team to watch for sure.
Yeah, and I had heard about the Reds being somewhat good this year, but when they lost Trevor Bauer, I thought, they're not going to be great at all. but they've kind of shocked me by how good they've been this season. So we'll see what ends up happening. But again, that NL Central is pretty tough right now with the Brewers and Cubs. We haven't really talked about him much, and he's been basically the big talk in baseball right now. Shohei Ohtani, I messed that name up, but he's been great this season. And a lot of people compared him to the next maybe Babe Ruth to be able to DH and pitch once a week or something like that. What do you think about that? And do you think he wins the MVP this season?
Ohtani is the MVP right now. If the season ended today, he'd be the MVP. And I'm kind of floored at how good he's been. So I was on the bandwagon, like every offseason. I'm like, oh yeah, going to this season, I want to see Shohei Ohtani unleashed because they kind of babied him his first couple of years in the league. They're like, okay, he'll pitch and he'll hit, but he can't hit the day before he pitches. He can't hit the day after he pitches. And then they only pitched him once a week. It was a mess. I was like, you guys need to kind of take the kid gloves off of him because he's young and we want to see what he can do. They've done that this year. The Angels have a new manager, Joe Madden, is like, we're going to play him. They've even put him in the outfield once in a while to keep his bat in the lineup. And he has been beyond what anybody anticipated with the bat. I don't think anyone thought he was going to be, adjusting to major league pitching at this level, like this quickly. And the power is legit. He's always had power, but that hit tool to go with it. So yes, he is the MVP if the season were to end today, simply because of what he's doing on both sides of the ball. He does need to show better command on the mound. He really does. But once he gets that dialed in, even if he's like a mid-threes ERA starter, I mean, who else? Like you mentioned Babe Ruth. Like who does that? like who can do what he does? I mean, leading the league in home runs, and you're a mid-threes ERA starter. It's unquestionable he would be the MVP if the season ended today.
What do you think about his chances of the home run derby? Because when I saw the list, it didn't really blow me away. So he's probably got a really good chance of winning. But what do you think of his chances of winning this year's home run derby?
I think he has a very good chance because he has raw power. I mean, it's at Coors Field. It probably is. Lefties and righties hit it out of Coors pretty evenly. I know the right field has a higher wall there, but he can get it out. He's going up against Trevor Story, going up against Pete Alonso. That's going to be tough. Alonso honestly might be the favorite for me. I would the reigning champ. I think I would pick Pete Alonso to defend his title, but I think Ohtani will put on a show. I think he will.
To be honest with you, I totally forgot about Pete Alonso, but he seems like a player that people kind of forget about. But speaking of Pete Alonso, the Mets right now, they're doing pretty solid. What do you think about their chances this year in the NL East? And do you think they make a run and at least make the NLCS maybe?
I think they make a run for sure. And yes, the NLCS is in play. Unfortunately, they just haven't had great production from Lindor. Everyone is excited to see their brand new shortstop. I mean, he's been better as of late, but I think that was just a case where he put too much pressure on himself. This dude signed that contract literally the day before the season started. He was great in spring training. He's always been great and gets off to an abysmal start. I think it was just the pressure. He's like, oh, wow, I'm the richest shortstop in baseball. I need to justify it. Put a lot of pressure on himself where he just needs to be himself. And he seems to have kind of relaxed lately. But yeah, I think the Mets are going to be good. I think they're going to make a run at it. But, it's that NL playoff race is always interesting because it's not like the AL, the Rays are going to come out, the Astros are going to come out. The National League is always a bit more interesting. You see some weird stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if they got bounced in the first round. I wouldn't be surprised if they made it to the World Series even because the National League is always more interesting and there's some surprises in the playoffs usually.
Yeah, I mean, the Mets have been kind of interesting. You see them on TV a lot this year, especially with Sunday Night Baseball. And when I see him, I don't see, of course, Jacob deGrom is the big guy right now. He's the best pitcher in baseball right now. But I don't know. We'll see what happens with New York. It seems like the Yankees aren't quite having the season we expect them to have. And, I mean, maybe the Yankees make a run here because they're the Yankees. But I would assume they still make the playoffs, but what do you think about the Yankees' chances?
Honestly, I think it's going to depend on this month, July, because we saw them run into a bit of a cold stretch, I think like in May or earlier in the season. I think it was late April. And then they went on a win streak. They went on a really hot streak, like good 10 or 15 game stretch where they won a lot of games, and they were right back in the thick of things. Now they've regressed. Back then I was like, yeah, it's fine. They'll rip off a win streak. They'll be fun. But now it's getting to the point in the season where like you can't really afford to go 5 games back or something like that of a playoff spot, especially with how well Boston is playing and Tampa Bay is playing, Toronto. I think these next 3 weeks leading up to the trade deadline are going to be like, they need to make a move fast. They can't wait until that deadline, by the way. They need to go out and they need to get an outfielder. They also need to go out and get a starting pitcher. That's what they need, because outfield, Aaron Hicks is out for the year. That dude, unfortunately, is made out of glass. It is what it is. And then pitching, they've just had pitching woes all year long. Luis Severino had a setback on his road to recovery. That was a big blow. Of course, Corey Kluber was having a great year, and he's out. So they need to go out and get an outfielder. They need to go out and get a starting pitcher, and they need to do it within the next 2 weeks, in my opinion. I think if they don't do that, we will not see the New York Yankees playing playoff baseball this October.
That'd be really weird to see, just to see how like the Yankees are one of the most, or probably the most popular team in baseball. And if they don't make the playoffs, that would just be really weird to see. And of course, Red Sox fans would probably love it, but it would just be weird to see. And you just mentioned the trade deadline's in 3 weeks. Could you see any big names getting moved? Because it seems like every year there always is, but what big names do you think will find new teams when the deadline?
Yeah, definitely. So one big name that's been out there is Trevor Story. That's been like the elephant in the room. People have been saying this dude should get traded for a while now, but it would be wise for the Rockies to trade him rather than waiting and letting him walk for nothing. Why would you hang on to him? Why would you hang on to him? He's going to be free agent at the end of the year. Don't do what you did with Arenado and trade him for a bag of peanuts and also throw in extra money for no reason. Go ahead and get yourself a good prospect there, some good prospects. But yeah, I think Trevor Story will be one name that should be on the move within the next 3 weeks.
And I've got a few more questions here, but this is one question that I've been really intrigued by. What do you think about the Astros season this year? And do you think if the Astros end up winning a World Series within the next 3 years, do you think people will finally forget about their cheating scandal, or do you think it will always be behind or always be in front of them?
It will always be in front of them. Even if the Astros win the World Series, they're just going to become that evil empire. They're going to become that evil empire that everyone's like really annoyed of, and they want to see them go away. But the Astros are proving this season that they will not go away easy. People thought they were going to, myself included, honestly, thought they were going to kind of lay flat this year. But I mean, I wouldn't be so fast, because Oakland will probably win that division like they've done most of the past few years. But as we see in the playoffs, the Astros are a good playoff team. So yeah, Astros are good, and they're not going to go away. They definitely do have a World Series chance.
Yeah, and it was just kind of interesting last year when they made that run. They were down 3-0 to Tampa, and they came all the way back and almost won in 7 games, and then they almost took on the Dodgers, which I thought would have been hilarious. But So, and you've kind of already mentioned your AL MVP, but who do you think the NL MVP? Because for a while there, it was Ronald Acuna, and it might still be him as well. But what do you think about the NL, or who do you think will win the NL MVP this year?
I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but I mean, right now, Jacob deGrom is making a very convincing argument for it right now. And largely because of what he's not, okay, we know he's a good pitcher, but what he's doing with the bat, the dude's hitting like 400 or something like that. And up until his last start, he had more runs batted in than earned run allowed as a pitcher, which is just insane. So he has a legitimate, he will get votes. But like first place votes, are tough to come by as a pitcher. We've seen pitchers win it, of course. Kershaw has won it, but he's going to be up there. Tatis will definitely be up there. And then someone on the Dodgers, just because they're the Dodgers, you have these winning teams. You have to have like a representative from there. I could see perhaps, I mean, they don't really have anyone running away with things in LA. And Mookie's kind of having an okay year by his standards. So maybe not even a Dodgers candidate. So I guess I would say Tatis would be the front runner. Acuna, as you mentioned, because that dude can snap a finger, get on a hot streak. So I would say that Cincinnati guys, but small market they always find it tough. So I would put my best right now. I would put it on Jacob deGrom. Honestly, I put on Jacob deGrom. and then Fernando Tatis right behind him.
Well, he'd be the first NL MVP to win it since Kershaw back in 2015, I believe, right? He'd be the
I believe,
last.
yeah.
But
yeah, because it's so rare for pitchers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because like I said, they're not always there every day. I mean, they're pitching every maybe
Fifth
twice
day.
a week. Yeah, exactly.
Every 5th day, yeah.
And when's the last time that both the NL and AL had an MVP as a pitcher? I mean,
wow, that's a very good question. I mean, I didn't think of it that way, but that's a very good question. Imagine that. That'd be something.
yeah, it would be interesting because I feel like that. Yeah, it's been a while since I can't even think of any right now. Again, the last pitcher I can think that won an MVP was Kershaw, but I think Josh Donaldson won the MVP that year in the AL. So,
Yeah.
now it'd be interesting. So, before we end the interview, and again, thanks for coming on, Deji. Who do you have in the World Series? I know it's still a little early. We're finally getting to that halfway season, but who do you think who do you think your World Series prediction is right now?
I'm going with the Giants versus Tampa Bay. I know, like that Tampa Bay team, something about them, they just know how to win. They know how to win. Boston is good too, but I think that in a 7-game series, especially if they get Glasnow back, the hope is that Glasnow can rehab his UCL tear and be back for September. If they get Glasnow back, I think that they're tough to beat. That would be my World Series prediction as of right now. Giants, Rays.
Yeah, Tampa Bay, it seems like even when they try to tank, they're still good. And they traded their best pitcher last year, Blake Snell, and yet they're still really good. And of course, Glasnow gets hurt. But before I let you go, again, I've got one more question here. I totally forgot about this, but this has been kind of the hot story in baseball right now. The whole, the substances that a pitcher can throw, or they can't throw or use certain substances when throwing. What do you think about that? And I don't really like the rule. And I think they should have gave the pitchers a year and should have just made it next year. But what do you think about that rule? And is there a chance that somehow the MLB ends up going back on their decision?
Yeah, so that's been a very interesting development. I knew about foreign substance abuse, but I didn't really understand how much of an impact it was having until I looked at the spin rate data myself. I mean, I looked at some guys' numbers and you just see a spike. Their spin rate went up 300 RPM over a year. I mean, you're like, whoa, and because we didn't have StatCast prior to 2015, it wasn't really something we paid attention to. And I'm sure, honestly, before 2015, of course, players were using foreign substances, but they weren't using it the same way they are now to get the extra spin because they just didn't. I don't think we have the technology for them to know how much it enhanced performance. So I think I'm neutral on it. Because I feel bad for the hitters because I want the hitters to have a fair playing field because a lot of people blame them and say, oh, baseball's unwatchable, 3 true outcomes, everyone strikes out now. But it's not fair to the hitters to say that when you have pitchers who are throwing filthy breaking balls because they have foreign substances. I mean, that's the reason why. That's honestly the reason we have empirical data showing that's the reason why offense has been down, strikeouts have been up. So we can get some of these these old timers like Gary Sheffield. He went on a rant about this and he doesn't watch baseball because strikeouts are up. I'm like, well, why don't you try to hit? Even you in your prime, Gary, right now, if you try to hit in today's game, I promise you strike out a higher clip. So that's the thing. I'm happy to see the strikeout rates cool down a little bit, at least in the early data. That's what it showed. But yeah, it is tough for the pitchers. Glasnow himself claimed that he believes it contributed to his injury because he has to grip his breaking ball different. He has to grip the ball tighter to get a hold, which is definitely possible. I mean, if you've thrown 80 innings in the season with rosin or whatever he was using, and then all of a sudden you have to stop. Yes, that's going to take some adaptation. So yeah, it definitely would have been more fair for them to usher it in during the off season, giving everyone a full off season to train with it. But something did have to be done about the lack of balls in play, because not only was it a bad look for the hitters, but for revenue wise, for viewers, fans of the game, Major League Baseball was having a hard time retaining viewership because of the lack of action. So everything baseball's trying to do is to increase the number of balls in play, and I mean, banning the shift is something they're experimenting with the minor leagues, obviously. So reducing strikeouts, more balls in play, you have more eyes watching the game, more excitement, more revenue at the end of the day, which is what they want. So, and more revenue for baseball is good for everyone. You know, even the pitchers that are complaining about it, it's going to help them at the end of the day. I mean, it's good for everyone.
Yeah, and I think as much I don't really know a whole lot about the rule. Like I've seen what it is, but I feel like it's really like the pitchers were not very happy. But the MLB should have went it as a different route. They should have controlled it better and said, "Hey, we'll give you a year, or we'll give you some time." They gave him like 10 days or something like that.
Yeah.
So didn't like the way they went about it. But I can still understand it, but I just didn't like the way they went about it. But at the end of the day, we'll end up seeing what happens. Before I let you go, Deji, and I keep on saying it, I'm sorry, but this is the last question. Do you have anything more about your podcast that you want to add, or just something more about your podcast?
Yeah, just come on over. I mean, we are one of few. I mean, there are a few out there, but we're one of few daily baseball podcasts. And yeah, I mean, it's that time of year. I know there aren't many other professional. I mean, you have other sports are wrapping up now, but baseball is really a summer thing. And if that's what you're interested in, Baseball Connection podcast is definitely where you want to be. So we're happy to have more listeners.
All right. Thanks for coming on, Deji. Don't forget to check out the Baseball Connection podcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Can you find it on YouTube, or where is it?
You can find it on YouTube too.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to. Yeah, it's on there.
Okay. And then, of course, you can follow him on Instagram and Twitter at Baseball Connections. All right. Thanks for coming on, Deji. It's been a pleasure. We haven't talked about baseball in a while, so I wanted to get more about it. And especially with the All-Star game happening soon, I know we're just about to hit the middle of the season. So, again, thanks for coming on, Deji.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, let's wrap up the show with our segment Questions from Instagram, where I answer 3 fan sports questions. If you want to be part of questions from Instagram, just type in your question in the STP Pod Instagram story, and most likely I will answer it and give you a shout out on the episode. The first question comes from @JoeForMore. He asked, how many more years do you think LeBron James has left? Well, I like the question here. I think he's got about 3 or 4 more years left. To be honest with you, he's getting older. We clearly know that he can't carry a team by himself. So I would say about 3 or 4 more years left. I don't think he wins a championship again. The Lakers are really going to have to be cautious of what they do, what they bring in. They've got to get the right guys, because if LeBron wants to catch MJ or pass him, they got a lot of work to do. He's still got to win 3 more championships. And with this roster right now, with how old he is, it's going to be hard for him to win 3 more. I think maybe he wins 1 more, but to be honest with you, I thought he would only win 3, so he ended up winning 4. So he passed my expectations, but I don't think he's going to ever win more. And again, I think he's got 3 or 4 more years left. This next question comes from @StanTheMan, and he asks, what do you think about the whole Aaron Rodgers situation, and will he play for the Packers this year? Well, I like the question. And again, we got this question earlier in the year when the whole thing started, or the whole thing became public right after the draft. I think he has no choice, to be honest with you. I've been at this since day one. I agree with a lot of people. He's going to have to stay. If he goes to the Broncos or Raiders, he's going to be in a worse situation. So I can't see him going anywhere. I think he's going to have to stay with the Packers. I bet next month he reports. And again, he's got I think it's already been passed. So he has to play for him or he won't get paid. So again, I think he's going to end up playing with the Packers. I think everything's going to be fine. I don't know how far they'll go this year because they have a talented roster, but we'll see what ends up happening. All right, thanks for the question @StanTheMan. Now on to our next question, and this comes from @EndOfTheLine, and they ask, do you think athletes should get paid? Yes, I think athletes should get paid. Similar to what I said in the poll question, I believe they should. I mean, I think they'll stay in college 1 more year, they'll get to provide for their families, and they'll get 1 more year of education, which is ultimately what we want them to do, right? So I think they should get paid. I think it's a great benefit. Now, I know it might hurt some small colleges, but most colleges won't be affected by this. I love the idea of athletes getting paid. I'm very for it. So again, thanks for the question @EndOfTheLine. And again, if you want to be part of questions from Instagram, don't forget to type in your story in STP Pod Story. Either comes out Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. So don't forget to follow that. You got to follow me on Instagram @SportsTown_podcast. All right, that's a wrap for this show. Thanks for listening to the Sportstown Podcast, or the STP Pod for short. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and much more. Also, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter @SportsTown Podcast. If you want to check out more videos of the Sportstown Podcast, click on the right.